Wonderful. Hello, everybody. This is Alana Kaivalya, and this is the Spiritual Leadership Podcast. It's my honor and pleasure to bring you wisdom every week in the realm of the things that you and I love, like spiritual leadership, yoga, astrology, alchemy, the tarot deck, divination. And today, specifically, we're going to talk about the power of ritual. Ritual is something that you and I likely engage in all of the time, but we may not realize that we're engaging in it. We may not understand the parts and the processes, and we may not understand how it truly works. So, I want to demystify the process and the power of ritual for you so that you can be sure that every time you lead someone through a ritual, that you're actually getting them to the finish line that you desire or that they desire. There's many ways to do a ritual, and I think typically the word ritual, when we think about it, when we hear it now, we associate it with practices of any specific religion. All religions have rituals associated with them. We think about what we do in a house of worship on a certain day of the week, and there's always some sort of ritual involved. Well, that's probably where most of us really cognitively recognize ritual and where we experience it. But as spiritual leaders, we actually engage in ritual all the time. A ritual is designed to bring someone from one state of being into the next state of being. It's a process of evolution for the human soul, really, for their psyche, for their spirit. It's a process of transformation. And we want to be conscious about that transformation so that the transformation actually goes in the direction that we're hoping. And rituals, again, they're often associated with specific religions, but they don't have to be. As long as the intention of the ritual is to evolve or unfold or develop one's psyche and spirit and soul, then it's going to have a positive outcome. And a ritual externalizes or makes physical that process. And the reason for that is that physical design of the ritual helps to give the psyche the memo that change is afoot. Otherwise, the psyche sometimes doesn't quite keep up with life as we know it. So, I'm going to use an example of a fairly common ritual that all of us have either witnessed or engaged in ourselves. It's a ritual that we see across culture, across time, and it's the ritual of marriage between two people who love each other. So, again, no matter what religion or background you're coming from, in fact, no matter where in time or space you might find yourself, you've likely at least witnessed this ritual, maybe even just on TV. But it's one that I can use as an example that you'll understand. So, during this marriage ritual, we have two separate people who know themselves as separate, who up until now have gone through life on their own, and they've chosen to go ahead through life together. Now, they've chosen that on a conscious level, but we want to recruit all of the psyche into these big decisions. And if you've listened to this podcast, previous episodes have explained the structure of the psyche and the power of spiritual psychology. You know that we are not just a conscious mind. We are also a supra-conscious mind, and we are also an unconscious mind. There's all these three parts that go into the totality of our psyche. So if the conscious mind decides this is my person, I'd like to walk through life with them, then we engage in the ritual of marriage. So these two people who were once separate individuals have chosen now to go through life together, and they start the ritual in separate places. One person will perhaps stand already at the altar while another one approaches, or they'll start separately and approach the altar together. We also have a host of witnesses who bear witness to the coming together of these two humans. And that's helpful not only to increase the energy, efficacy, power of the ritual for the two involved in marriage, but it also gives the memo to the witnesses that now these two people are to be treated as one. So when we go from this separate place at the beginning of the ritual, we walk toward the altar with these two folks. They stand upon the altar and they cross a threshold. And this is an important piece of ritual that I'll talk about here in a moment. But once you cross the threshold, and it's a quite literal threshold at an altar of a wedding, a marriage ceremony, that means that you are officially fully engaged in the ritual and the process has begun. Now, as the actual meat, let's say, of the ritual begins, that's when the cultural nuances kick in. So, depending on the location, the belief systems of each individual, the culture that they're from, perhaps even the religion that they practice, the actual individual activities that happen during a marriage ceremony may differ from place to place and from time to time. But they're all going to symbolize the same thing. They're all going to be physical activities that bring to life this concept of two people now joining forces, whether it's something like a hand fasting ritual or pouring two different colors of wine in together that can no longer be unmixed. Again, you'll find lots of different examples of things you can do to make physical this idea of two people now becoming one, but that's what's happening during the ritual. And that's why we do these physical things, because the externalization of the process helps to clue in the psyche that change is coming, that we are now going to be different at the outcome or at the outset of this ritual than we were going into it. There's something that's going to shift inside of us as a result of doing these physical activities. All right, so the two individuals go through the motions, they say, I do, and then they exit the threshold, they move off of the altar together. And it's at this moment in the ceremony, the closing of the ceremony, that not only do all of the witnesses see these two people now joined, but these two people, these two individuals themselves also know that to be true. They are now walking through life together. So this is a common ritual, and we can see how it creates a pretty big change for these people. And it is a big ritual. It's a momentous ritual. And of course, now, statistically speaking, we often have divorce as well. But consider the fact that in most traditions and for most people and in most communities, we don't have a divorce ritual. There are a lot of people out there who walk through life with their psyches still believing that they are coupled with the person that they married. We need something to re-usher them out of that experience, to bring them into an individual state once again. Otherwise, their psyche does not get the memo. Rituals give us the memo that change is afoot, that things are going to be different, that we are now different people. And it doesn't have to be as big and momentous and giant as a marriage. But again, that's a good example. We can have rituals for small things as well. We can have rituals in the morning that usher us from being asleep to now being awake. We can have rituals that begin the process of dinner or eating with family. Oftentimes, you'll hear families saying some sort of blessing before the meal begins. You can have a ritual that brings you from one career into the next, one job into another, one relationship into another, from a place of sadness, despair, and grief into a place of closure, healing, and restoration. Rituals can do all of these things with the right intention and with the right pieces put into them so that the people who participate in the rituals derive meaning from them. You may, in some point in your history, have participated in a ritual that was not your own. And I think about this when we go to various ritual practices for friends or family. Perhaps we'll go to a baptism that is not of our culture, or perhaps we'll go to some other sort of ceremony that is not of our particular culture or belief system or religion. And we can always be respectful in those circumstances, and we can be moved even by these rituals or whatever is taking place. But it won't necessarily usher us into the next phase of being unless what is being done in the ritual is meaningful and powerful to us. So, with this groundwork of ritual laid, hopefully now there's an illumination and an understanding of the power and importance of ritual in our lives, knowing that human beings, again, throughout time, throughout space, no matter where you find yourself in history or on the planet, have always all engaged in ritual. They are an important part of our lives. And I bring this forth to you in the Spiritual Leadership Podcast because who but us might help our students, clients, and communities to their next phase of being through ritual? Statistically speaking, more and more people these days are walking away from their native belief systems. It's no problem. That's the way the culture is moving. It's fine. However, Just because they're walking away from their native belief systems doesn't mean they no longer need what those belief systems provide. They do. They just need it in a different way, and they need it from people like you, spiritual leaders, who can listen to what they believe in, to what their needs are, to what transformation they seek, and help them get to it. So, if you have ever led a yoga class, you have led a ritual. If you have ever led a guided meditation, you have led a ritual. If you are a massage therapist, a body worker, a healer on any level, if people have ever come to you in one state and then left in another, you are the bearer of rituals. And I guarantee you, you're going to make those rituals that you already lead even more powerful if you understand how they work and how they're constructed. So, rituals have three parts. And when I name the parts, you're going to say, well, Alana, that actually sounds really obvious. And it's true. All the three parts will be obvious. But to tend to each of the three parts and to make sure that you are consciously creating these three parts is really the key for our work. So the first part is called the preliminal phase. Liminal is a beautiful word. Liminal, the space of liminality or liminality itself is like the no man's land. It's neither here nor there. It's neither up nor down. It's neither without or within. It's this ethereal non-space in which we can craft whatever we want. So the first phase of the ritual is the preliminal phase. It's that setup to getting to the liminal. Because in the preliminal phase, we walk toward the ritual and we understand that something is going to happen here. It has not yet happened. We come to the ritual as we were, not yet as we will be. But there's a sense of psychological, mental, spiritual, emotional preparation as we move toward the ritual. So if I think about a yoga class or building a yoga class, these are your students driving to the class. And then for your part in it, how do they enter the classroom? Do they enter quietly? Do they greet each other? Do they sit on a blanket? Do they stand on their mats? What type of energy are you trying to create at the beginning of this experience to get them in the right mindset so that the ritual can take place effectively? Is there music being played? What lights are there? Is there any incense burning? How do you create and hold that space? In my example of a marriage or a wedding, oftentimes we are in some type of house of worship or in some sacred environment. It could be outdoors. The space has been set up. The chairs are there. There are certain reserved seats. There's likely music playing. A lot of thought goes in to what happens even before the ritual starts. Even before in a yoga class, we say Om and begin in our Tadasana. Even before in a wedding, the officiant or clergy member says, welcome to everyone. There's a lot of lead up. So be calculated in your lead up and how you bring people into a certain ritual space to ensure that the intention, the energy of it is exactly what you intend and will be catalyzing for the end goal. There is always going to be an end goal in a ritual. It should never be haphazard. We shouldn't go to a wedding and, just hope that the couple ends up married. We should never go to a yoga class and, boy, just hope that maybe we feel better and more elevated at the end. We want to direct that. And as spiritual leaders, that is our job. That is our role in order to make sure that we get people to their desired finish line or to the one that we are providing for them. We may say we're doing a workshop in order for you to help balance your chakras. Well, if that's the case, then at the end of the workshop, we want to make sure that they have, right? So how do we initially set up that space? Now, there's no right answer. And here's the piece that is tricky for us as modern day spiritual leaders because we don't necessarily have a specific religious practice that we draw from. Because in our modern world, we like to pull from different traditions because belief systems in our classroom are going to be wide and varied. We have a really difficult task to determine in the best way we possibly can what kinds of things are going to be most meaningful for the audience that is in front of us. Now, I understand. I come from a yogic background, a yoga background. I've studied the practice of yoga for more than 20 years. You, as you're listening, may have a similar experience. Well, Alana, shouldn't we just follow the yoga tradition? Aren't there prescribed rituals in the yoga tradition? Yes, of course there are to some extent, and those rituals might be very helpful. However, we need to be conscious of the fact that I'm a Westerner. Most of the students that I work with are Westerners. That may also be true for you. So the yogic tradition may not be their history and their tradition. In which case, while it's a wonderful, powerful, incredible, transformative tradition, if it's not what is most meaningful, if it's not already embedded in their psyche, it may not actually have the full power to transform. We need to understand our audience. And if our audience are primarily Westerners, we will actually need to pull from the Western tradition things that are powerful and meaningful for us in order to make the ritual powerful and meaningful for our audience. The psyche is pretty much locked into place in childhood. A lot of what's happening in our psyche and our psychology was codified definitely before the age of 7, usually before the age of 5. So you need to take into account where people actually grew up and what traditions they may have actually grown up in, even if those are traditions that they're not overly participatory in now. Perhaps we can find an elegant way to bring some of those traditions and that meaning into our rituals in order to catalyze the transformation that it is we're trying to provide. So, if you think of a yoga class, and again, this is another good common experience, or in a massage therapeutic setting, or in another healing type of setting, you know, it could be nice to play Sanskrit mantras, and I do love them. I literally wrote the book on them. It's called Sacred Sound. But it could also be nice to play some Western music that they might recognize and resonate with. And that could help to recruit their psyche into the participation of this ritual. Rather than burn some sort of Eastern incense, perhaps some sort of candle from the West could be nice, or some roses, which are the Western version of a lotus, as flowers go. So think about what your audience is, the kind of ritual you want to create, the traditions that they come from, and how you can make meaning even in this preliminal phase. When the ritual begins, that's when we enter what's called the liminal phase. And this is the moment at which their psyche leaves behind who they were, but is not yet who they will become or who you will become. And these are the moments in which we spend activating that physical element of the ritual. And whatever we do physically in the ritual needs to represent outwardly what we're trying to transform inwardly. And there's a lot of ways to do this through mythology, through symbolism. Some very common things are the use of fire. If we're trying to transform and let go, fire is a great way to burn things up. Perhaps we write out a letter and we burn it in the flames to release that energy. Perhaps we bring something with us from the past and burn it in order to release whatever it is we're letting go of in the past. Another very common symbol and ritual is water. We can use water to wash or to cleanse. We see this oftentimes in a baptism or in an initiation type of ceremony where we're cleansed of our past self and we are now ready to be our new self. And water are fantastic. We can use the earth elements. We can use the elements of astrology. We can use the elements of divination, whatever it is that is most meaningful to you. In a yoga class, we use elements of asana often. We use elements of breath. We can use elements of mantra or prayer, even. Depending on the kind of ritual you're crafting, prayer in our native language may be more helpful than prayer in a foreign language. When we want to bless something or honor something, we want to make sure that the people who are participating in the ritual understand exactly what it is we're blessing and honoring. So, to craft a ritual, and again, rituals can usher us from any phase of being into another. It doesn't have to be a big one. The ritual of marriage, the ceremonies of death, the ceremonies of birth. Those are the big ones that we will all most likely participate in some way in our lifetime. But some people might just need a ritual to go from being sad and lonely to now being in a partnership. People need support on many different levels. And as a spiritual leader, it's helpful to ask your client or your students what might be powerful for them in a ritual, what might be meaningful for them in a ritual. They may be able to share with you some things that you can actually do in this liminal phase that will be most supportive of their transformation. Think outside the box in this regard. It doesn't have to fit any one mold. We can release, we can restore, we can cleanse, we can balance. We can use big physical movements, we can use small physical movements, we can use prayer, we can use meditation, we can use communion, we can use the holding of hands, we can be seated, we can be standing. We can include scents or smells. We can include physical talismans like a stone or a crystal. But whatever we do in a ritual should be sacred to those who participate in it. And that's where the transformation comes. And once the physical activities of the ritual are complete, we then exit the liminal phase and go into the post-liminal phase, right? So we've got preliminal, liminal, and now post-liminal. And the post-liminal phase, just as the preliminal phase was important, is really critical for allowing people to reintegrate with their new self back into society. And this is a piece that I have found in my own history of teaching yoga to be often missing. I've noticed in many yoga circumstances, yoga classes, workshops, there seems to be this big buildup, this big ritual, this big catalyzation of transformation, all this energy and movement, and then suddenly things just end. And people are left a bit raw to walk back out into the world. This reintegration piece, this final piece of the ritual, is critically important. It's what seals up our psychic energy so that we can be fortified in order to walk forward as our new selves. So we have to close the ritual appropriately. This is one of the reasons why I have been insistent in my own teaching and guidance in yoga teacher trainings to always include a good lengthy shavasana at the end of a yoga class. I require my own teacher training students to save at least 10 minutes of every class, even if it is only a 60-minute class for shavasana. People need that time to reintegrate as much as they needed the previous 45 to 50 minutes of movement. If it's a different kind of ritual, if you're doing a more meditative ritual or a shorter ritual or a less weighty ritual, then my advice to you is to simply reverse out of the ritual as you entered it. So perhaps the ritual space is a circle that you've created and people step into it. Have them carefully step out. Perhaps you start the ritual with a sound like Om or a simple prayer, and you do the same in order to exit the space. Perhaps you start the ritual by closing your eyes, and then you end the ritual by opening them. Give some kind of closure or sense of uh, finality at the end of the ritual before you yourself or you let your students or your clients leave. And as they leave, give them a supportive space to leave through. So, again, if that's the studio or the therapeutic space, is there music playing? What are the lights doing? Are they talking with others? Are they remaining silent with themselves? Do they take something with them? I always like the use of talismans in a ritual. So perhaps to the ritual, the client brings maybe something that's important or meaningful for them in terms of the ritual, like a crystal or a lock of someone's hair. The ritual is infused, that talisman with that energy, and then they exit with that talisman. And now it's something that helps them remember or hearken back to that ritual, to what it is that they learned or what it is that they let go of or what it is they transformed. So I love the use of a talisman. I highly encourage that if you can work that in. Once people have exited the space, they take not just the physical activities that they've done from the ritual, but the psycho-spiritual activities. They are going to be different. They are going to be new. They are going to be transformed. And you've done this. You've helped them through this. You've given them this permission, this blessing, this space to do that. And that's an incredibly important and sacred gift for the spiritual leader. This is an important space for us to be able to hold because there are very few other places and people that your students, your community, your clients are going to be able to go for this kind of work, and every human needs it. So consider the use of ritual in your work as a spiritual leader and how you might bring that forth more profoundly, or how you might even start to just tune up the work that you already do to make the rituals you perform even more profound. So I hope these insights have been helpful to you in your journey as a spiritual leader. I'm here every week to give you more information on these topics to help you step more fully into your role as a spiritual leader. And of course, I have an entire suite of online courses and certification programs to help you in that regard as well. To find out more about what I do, head over to my website, alanakay.com, and perhaps consider joining us in the highereducation.yoga membership, where every month we provide you with support and training in the realm of spiritual leadership. Your clients, your community needs you now more than they possibly ever have before. And it is my honor to give you the tools, resources, and training to step into your role as a spiritual leader. Until next time, take care of yourself and take care of each other.